So Ham, which was the youngest son of Noah, born 96 years before the flood, he became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negro. Right? That's Zondervan, the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary's explanation of, in a way of regarding the Negro. Okay, so we know then Shem had to have been the one who became the progenitor of the Negroes, especially when you read, some of these extra biblical books like what's in Perkei, the Rabbi 24, the 24th chapter, where it explains Shem being black. So that would explain why many of us who are Negro only Israelites, who say that Israel, or the Hebrew Israelite, the 13 tribes, are only Negro. That's where we get that explanation from, because it only makes sense that Jacob, if he's looked at as being one of those Negroes, right, according to the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary's explanation of the Negro, then Jacob's sons would only be right that Jacob's sons were also Negroes, right? Negro in origin. And when you further break down the logic of it all, right? This is a late night cap, by the way, guys. When you further break down the logic of it all, you have, let me see, you have the 13 tribes. You have Jacob, who is the one, the Negro of it all. He's at the top. So he has 13, at some point in time, eventually 13 tribes root from him. He's the progenitor of them, right? It only makes sense that they themselves are Negroes as well. Right now, right. One thing that I wanted to say is that due to our sin, there's a confusion of faith. So you can have, right, being that the father is the one that determines the identity of the child. So if the father is a Negro, in this case, Jacob, or you would have, so just to prove the 13, you would have Judah, Benjamin, Levi, Simeon, Zebulon, Ephraim, Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, Asher, Naphtali, Issachar, and Dan. That's 13, right? So one of those 13, let's say at some point in time now, Gad had 7 sons. I'm using Gad. One of Gad's sons used Arali. Arali, he would have a son. His son would marry, say, a woman of another nation. That son, at some point in time down the line, those sons, if they kept marrying a lighter skinned woman, they would end up looking like what we know today as a white person. But guess what? Their DNA, if they were to take a DNA test, right, and this is where DNA comes in as necessary, because if they took a DNA test, their DNA would show that they are Negro in origin through comparison. So you could have someone who would be classified as white today. Now, I'm not saying all white people are, but not all skin folk are kinfolk, right? Colloquially speak, let's use that term. So you could have someone today, right? Very few in number, of course, who are white skinned, who appear to be Asian, who appear to be, whatever else other kind of race out there that would that could actually be descendant from Gad, right, and or Israel, that would be Negro in origin, right? Again, Jacob being a Negro because Ham is the father, the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negro. That makes Jacob a Negro, right? When you break down the logic of it. So this is the explanation behind that. You could have someone, again, you could have someone who is of a lighter skin or appears to be from another nation that could have DNA that is Negro in origin. Okay, you it's hard for the, like, I've been watching videos out there where people speak against Negro only Israelites, but in doing so, then how much do they really believe? These are some of these same Israelites that use the Zondervan Compact Bible dictionaries definition, some say definition, I say explanation of who the Negroes actually are. You can't. If you're saying that Jacob is not of Negro origin only, because if you dig into, and I want to make it clear, as well, not every Negro, not every so-called black person appearing to be a Negro is a Negro, right? What do I mean? Again, not all skin folk are kinfolk. A lot of black people, right? And if you deal with, I want to explain sometime later on into this stream, the significance of DNA and the misnomers that people, like, they erroneously try to say that DNA, or trivialize DNA and throw it all away, so to speak, throw out the baby with the bathwater, but it doesn't make sense. But I'll get back to that later. What I wanted to speak about, and I kind of like lost my point, but so you could have, basically, you could have someone, right? So getting back to the Negro, you could have someone who appears to be a Negro, but their DNA would say something different. It would say that they are Germans, just to use that, German in origin. They're R1A in origin. And I'm going to tell you right now, E1B1A accounts, and its subclades, it accounts for all 13 tribes, haplotype for family, like unlike no other haplogroup can. And you have to take a really close look at E1B1A. And I've done videos on this to see, and to see in the spirit, basically, and in the physical, what I know to be true, right, according to scripture. So again, not all skinfolk are kinfolk. You could have according to some DNA companies, and this is where I wanted to go. For instance, African Ancestry, and they are a thorough African Ancestry is a thorough DNA company, right? And again, I'll explain, to a certain extent they are, and I'll explain what I mean by to what extent thorough. But African Ancestry is a thorough DNA company to go by, but they have statistics that show that 3 to 4 so-called black people who get their DNA done don't have, this so-called African ancestry. Their ancestry does not compare to it. In other words, it would go back to something other than. So for instance, 3 to 4%, that's 30 to 40%, right, of so-called black people would find themselves with European ancestry, would find themselves with Asian ancestry, and so on and so forth, right? So this makes the case where you would find in Deuteronomy, the 4th chapter, I want to say about the 27th verse, and Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, the 67th verse, where it explains, or maybe perhaps the 64th verse, where it would say that the Israelites were scattered, basically left few in number, right? This would get more into, this would open the eyes in saying that, because not every black person you see, you know, in America is Israelite in origin. That would be erroneous to think that, and to try and explain that or use that as doctrine. It's just not. Right? We have, again, 3 to 4%, and then you have the slave master, so-called, right? No, the actual slave master, who's responsible. Again, the father determines the nation, the identity of the child. The slave master is responsible for a good percentage of so-called black people we see walking around today. A lot of some of these black people, they have European ancestry, right? Now I don't want to get too far into that, but just for a quick explanation of it, you have, again, during slavery, we know what happened. So you have this percentage that exists. Forgot where I was going to go with that, but anyway, again, this 30 to 40% dynamic. Okay, and we know that they are European in origin. Now I want to explain DNA, because you have some people out there who now speak against DNA, saying that, oh well, basically throw it all out, right? And then you have some explanations of people who say, well, you have this one dynamic, this one event where a man sent his lizard's DNA into 23andMe, and the DNA came back Nigerian. Well, I want you guys to think and ask yourself, okay, 23andMe, they use a tool for spit. How much of this lizard's saliva did this man send back? You got to fill that tube up. So what did he do to this lizard to fill that tube up with the saliva from this lizard for it to be enough? Also, there are many cases where if you send in a sample, right, the company will reject it. They always do. Right? The website that people are using to refer to this event, the guy's page says satire. So that's the third flaw in this story. There's also another story, right, that kind of discredits, people try to use to discredit DNA, and they'll use this one story with this Chihuahua named Snoopy, where this man sent his dog Snoopy's DNA in, and the dog's DNA came back to be of indigenous ancestry. The people who bring the story out to discredit DNA, they'll use the article, and these are some of the same people who will read articles all day long to make their point, but yet they don't read on the second page where it says, and it's literally on the second page, you just got to flip the page, where it says that the owner, Larry Tenenbaum, of the Toronto-based Viagard Accumetrics, this is the DNA company, he was doing this for monetary purposes. So he was just anybody, any kind of DNA. He wasn't even checking the DNA in many cases. Look it up. I just gave you the DNA company. It's on the second page. There was a 33%. I want to kind of be accurate, but I believe it was like a 33.3% retainers fee for every lawsuit that materialized, in which they try to say none did. Okay, but we know then what the motive is. So can we really say that DNA is flawed? All of these shady stories to discredit DNA, to basically throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's flawed. And some of these people, or many of these people, if not all of them, are just totally dishonest. If you're using that method and you're stooping that low to try and discredit DNA, then now I'm looking funny style at you. Okay, that's like the second thing to mention. So we have the one with the story with the lizard, and now the story with the dog. And then another thing is this: DNA, you do not have to attach. We know the academic standard of history that was forced in a way on us, where they'll say, well, Black people aren't of indigenous ancestry to America. Black people never traveled around the world. They never created nothing that was of significance, or went anywhere that was of significance. They were confined to one area, to one spot. When we know that that's a grand scale lie. Okay, we know that, look, I just mentioned to you in the very beginning of this video that the Bible Compact Dictionary's definition or explanation of Ham in reference to the Negro, Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary's explanation of the Negro in correlation with Ham. Okay, so we have there, we already know there right there is a flaw in the history. We know that the Israelites were Negro in origin. So why then do we have to accept the history and the location of a lot of these DNA haplogroups that some of these DNA companies were kind of forced, and if not forced, they as well attached themselves to the academic standard of history, thus attaching the haplogroup, the DNA haplogroup, to the history. You don't, in other words, you do not have to attach the location or the history and the academic standards thereof to DNA and its haplogroups, right? When you do your own due diligence, you do your DNA, you come up with the truth, right? Solid truth, according to what you find, to what you uncover. So I'm going to tell you like this, for instance. Many of you will say, and again, it's mighty funny that you don't do that. You want to throw DNA out, and you'll say that, oh, well, we're the Israelites. Negro people or Black people are Israelites in origin, or Israelite in origin. And then you will point to where they say Jerusalem is. How funny. How funny. If they lied to you about the people, why not begin to say within your mind, could they have possibly lied to me about the location? If they were willing to display there's something called uparts, out of place artifacts. If they were willing to move things and shuffle things around to make their lie seem genuine and truthful, why wouldn't they do that with the land? Why wouldn't they do that with everything else? Right? There are some things that are worth holding on to, yes, but then there are some things that, again, if you do the history behind it, you'll come to find out what's true. I know DNA to be true because it reveals who's who. It reveals who's who, and it will reveal what is and what is not. Right, and then, like I said, E1B1A has a strong through frequency. I'm not using bodies. I'm using the frequency compared to what I see in the Bible. So I know that there were 13 Israelite tribes. You can read this in Ezekiel 48, that whole chapter, right? And then if not, just read the 48th chapter, Ezekiel, the 48th chapter, the 30th verse to about the 35th verse, and it'll give you 13 tribes. Joseph, we know Joseph was 2 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay, but again, you do have 13 tribes, and I mentioned that already. Judah, Benjamin, Levi, Simeon, Zebulon, Ephraim, Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, Asher, Naphtali, Issachar, and Dan, right? Should be 13. But back to the point, I know that according to what's written in First Kings, the 6th chapter, and then you can read it for yourself in the 7th chapter as well. I want to say about the 36th verse in the 6th chapter. It mentions the dimensions of the wall and the dimensions of the stone in the walls, right? You don't find that in what the world presently know as Israel today. You just don't see it. But I'll tell you where you see it at. It's in Cusco, Peru. Sacsayhuaman, to be more specific. So you have 3 zigzagging walls. This is something, again, that I've also went over on my channel in previous videos. But if you use that model, right, and just is to make the point of what I was saying earlier, if you use what I'm saying there, then that would make sense to say, well, E1B1A had to have been in the Americas, right, as well. There was also something mentioning articles in a recent past where people have determined that the Yoruba were once in Brazil. Okay, then that would explain then E1B1A had to have been in Brazil. It couldn't have just been confined to Africa. So this is the point that I'm making. DNA is not, DNA is good. DNA is not all bad. And it is not to be thrown completely out, right? If you have a lot of these instances that people do not want to admit to, and they want to confine, specifically speaking, E1B1A, the haplogroup, Y DNA haplogroup, to the continent of Africa, then okay, you got to say within yourself, all right, if I find out that E1B1A, its subclades, its haplotypes are all Israelite in origin, right, and then if I find out the location of Jerusalem being somewhere outside of Africa, okay, then E1B1A couldn't have been only confined to Africa. All praises to the Most High, in the name of Yahushua.